This recording is a service of the Allen County Public Library's audio reading service. It is specifically designed for and directed to people who have visual, physical, learning, or language challenges to reading traditional printed materials.
It's time once again for Time Magazine. Each week we bring you stories created by a team of national correspondents, from entertainment to politics, from technology to economics. Time Magazine has it all. Coming up on your audio reading service.
Welcome. This is Time Magazine, and I'm your reader, Timothy James, with the audio reading service at the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Today I'll be reading again from our double issue dated December 21st and December 28th, 2020, our Person of the Year issue with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on the cover. Now let's go to the Athlete of the Year, LeBron James. At 11:58 on June 8th, LeBron James logged on to a video call from the living room of his Los Angeles area home. As the clock hit noon, James, who abhors tardiness, took command of a virtual meeting that included more than 20 top athletes, entertainers, and political pros. He set a serious tone. Across the country, people were filling the streets to march against racial injustice and demand systemic change. What could this group do about it? James had the answer, and it wasn't another celebrity PSA, an all-star coalition committed to pushing back against the suppression of black voters. To lay out the severity of the problem, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson detailed how disinformation campaigns attempt to lower turnout. Golden State Warriors forward Draymond Green expressed discomfort about encouraging others to be politically engaged since he himself had not voted since 2008. But such stories, he was assured, were exactly the point. Green's experience could inspire others to vote for the first time, or return to the polls as he would. On a follow-up call 10 days later, comedian Kevin Hart asked if they would all be receiving Black Panther berets. Hart was joking, but he spoke to the urgency with which James was approaching the cause. The moment required a movement, and LeBron James, the greatest basketball player of his generation, arguably of any generation, and one of the most prominent black men in the world, would lead the way. That was my initial call to action, James tells Time in late November, to let people know what my mission was, what my passion was, and how we were going to deliver. On June 23rd, James launched the nonprofit More Than a Vote with a single-minded focus on getting more people to the polls. The group pushed for sports arenas to be used as polling places on the grounds that they could allow for social distancing while accommodating large numbers of voters. In the hope of keeping lines moving and locations open, they recruited young people to replace older poll workers who were sidelined by fears of COVID-19. By August, nearly 50 athletes, entertainers, and media figures, including WNBA player and ESPN host Sheeny Agwumike, and NFL stars Patrick Mahomes and Odell Beckham Jr., had signed on as founding partners. The organization partnered with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and by Election Day, less than 5 months after its founding, had helped recruit more than 40,000 election workers nationally and in places like Atlanta, Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philadelphia, all cities that helped deliver key swing states to Joe Biden. At every step, James supported the work by recruiting fellow athletes to the cause, promoting More Than a Vote to his more than 48 million followers on Twitter, and turning himself into a billboard by wearing a Vote or Die shirt to practice. It was the highest profile example of the surge in activism that spread across the sports world in 2020. Spurred by a pandemic that has disproportionately taken the lives and livelihoods of people of color, and by police killings of unarmed black Americans, everyone, from college athletes to tennis stars to race car drivers to hockey players, did things like speak out against racial injustice, join marches, and even lead the temporary shutdowns of major sporting events. Indeed, the NBA playoffs might well have never finished had James not decided to stay in the league's Disney World bubble and see the season through. Not only is he the best player, but he has the most powerful voice, says tennis champion Naomi Osaka. During her run to the U.S. Open title in September, she wore masks honoring 7 black Americans killed in recent years, including Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, and Breonna Taylor. After nearly 2 decades in the NBA, James has fully embraced that his talent on the court is a means to achieving something greater off it. And this year, more than in any before, he showed why he is unrivaled in both. Despite misgivings, James played on in the bubble and led the Los Angeles Lakers to the NBA championship, his first with the team and 4th overall. By staying, James increased his leverage and influence and got deep-pocketed owners, fellow athletes, and fans the world over engaged directly with democracy. And through it all, he spoke personally to the anguish of black Americans, channeling pain and outrage into a plan of action. More Than a Vote did not endorse a political candidate, but James believes the result of his organization's work in the election, Donald Trump's removal from office, will ease some of the tumult of the past 4 years. At the end of the day, when you're going through adversity or you're going through anything in life, the one person that you believe you can count on is the person that's in the captain's seat, says James, who knows from occupying his team's top chair. He can always keep everything calm, make people feel like no matter what we're going through, we're going to make it through. And I believe, as Americans, we didn't feel that over the last 4 years. We always felt like we were in the ocean, and the waves are crashing against our boat and the thunderstorms are coming down. So I believe that our people just got tired of not feeling a sense of calmness, and they went out and used their right to vote. Despite all this effort, a large swath of America would still prefer that James just shut up and dribble, as a pundit once said. When asked if he had anything to say to such critics, he chuckles. "You hear my laugh?" James says. "There it is. That is my direct message to them." This wave of activism crested on October 26th, when the Milwaukee Bucks declined to take the floor 3 days after police in Kenosha, Wisconsin, shot Jacob Blake 7 times in the back. Even in a year that shattered all norms, a Wildcat strike in the playoffs seemed unfathomable. When the WNBA, NHL, pro tennis, and teams in Major League Baseball and Major League Soccer all took a pause, too. Sports, with the support of most team owners and league officials, had been forced to halt in support of black lives. I respect the hell out of them for doing that. John Carlos, the American sprinter who raised his fist along with Tommy Smith on the medal stand at the 1968 Olympics, told Time on the evening of the Bucks' walkout. Because you have to squeeze the toothpaste tube to get people to respond. Momentum had been building all summer. When the WNBA started its delayed season in July, the players publicly dedicated it to Taylor, a Louisville, Kentucky medical worker killed by police in a botched raid of her home. After Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, a co-owner of the Atlanta Dream, called Black Lives Matter divisive and Marxist in July, many players started wearing shirts backing her opponent, the Reverend Raphael Warnock. The month before, NASCAR had announced a formal ban on Confederate flags at its events and properties after Bubba Wallace, the lone black driver in the top series, spoke out about the discomfort the flags caused. The night the Bucks took their stand, Osaka, who marched in Minneapolis following George Floyd's death, withdrew from the semifinals of the Western and Southern Open in similar protest, rather than make her forfeit the tournament suspended play in solidarity. Athletes around the world took up the mantle. The 23-year-old Manchester United forward Marcus Rashford successfully lobbied the UK government to provide $220 million in benefits to support families in need over the next year. Lewis Hamilton, the Formula One superstar and the sport's only black driver, began kneeling before races wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt and helped launch an effort to create opportunities for black drivers and engineers in motorsports. Taken together, the demands and demonstrations marked a new phase of player empowerment and agency that has been more than a half-century in the making. In 1969, Curt Flood of the St. Louis Cardinals challenged the reserve clause, which could bind players to teams for life. That led to free agency, which gave athletes in team sports significantly more control of their economic destiny. As their star power grew, so did their appeal to marketers, and no athlete bridged those worlds better than Michael Jordan, whose lucrative deals with Nike, McDonald's, and other major brands showed that transcendent sports stars could be their own corporate behemoths. So long it was thought as they steered clear of contentious political or social issues. For years, Jordan's famous line, "Republicans buy sneakers too," has been an axiom for athletes who want to capitalize on their celebrity. He had every reason to think that way. Muhammad Ali sacrificed the prime years of his career and became a pariah for refusing to serve in a war he viewed as unjust. Carlos and Smith received death threats after their Black Power salute. In 2016, Colin Kaepernick started kneeling during the national anthem to call attention to police brutality. He hasn't played in the NFL since that season. It was James, heir to Jordan on the court and in the boardroom, who established a new paradigm in which commercial clout exists alongside political principle. He remains one of the world's top pitchmen, endorsing Nike, AT&T, Walmart, and other major brands. And he has laid waste to the dated notion that political and social engagement is some sort of distraction for athletes. In 2020, James led the NBA in assists for the first time in his career before winning the NBA championship and his fourth Finals MVP award at age 35. Athletes can now bring their full humanity to the games, insisting that their identities be recognized and rejecting the notion that their athleticism is all that matters. When you have somebody of LeBron's stature setting the tone, it makes it that much easier for everyone to get on board, says 11-time WNBA All-Star Sue Bird, who also won a fourth career league title this season, and who came up with the idea of wearing Vote Warnock t-shirts. Hamilton, who won a record-tying 7th F1 championship this season, points to James as a ballast. When I saw across the pond that another top athlete was also fighting for similar causes, Hamilton tells Time, I knew, okay, I'm not alone here. On the evening of August 26, hours after the Bucks refused to take the court, NBA players and coaches gathered in a ballroom of Disney World's Coronado Springs Resort to figure out next steps. COVID-19 had shut down the NBA season in March, and the league had restarted in late July in an Orlando bubble that included daily testing and other safety measures. The room was on edge. Players were still processing the horror of what had happened in Kenosha. James was frustrated. No one, in his mind, was making a compelling case for returning to the floor. With the rest of the Lakers, he walked out of the meeting before it ended. Michelle Roberts, executive director of the National Basketball Players Association, thought he might also leave the bubble and take the rest of the league with him. If he had said, what we are doing is too important and screw the championship, I think that would have had a lot of guys saying, wow, he's about to give up another ring, so maybe I should check myself and wonder whether this basketball stuff is really that important, she says. I don't think we would have played. James says he was very close to leaving. That night, he told his wife and family there was a strong possibility he was headed home. We were still with our brothers in solidarity, meaning the Milwaukee Bucks, he says. It was something that hit home in their backyard. We all understood that, but if we're going to move forward, what is our plan? At that very moment, I didn't believe that we, as a collective group of players, had a plan at all. We had taken the stand to sit out, but how are we going to make a difference going forward? A conversation between James Players Union President Chris Paul, a few other key players, and Barack Obama helped provide clarity. The former president's advice, use your leverage. The next day, James addressed the NBA owners. Their faces beamed in on a screen. He knows how to apply pressure, says Lakers owner Jeannie Buss, who on December 3rd signed her star player to a 2-year, $85 million contract extension. James asked the assembled billionaires to join the players in helping more people vote. LeBron was a calming voice, but one that I didn't view as oppositional, says NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. I viewed it as, all right, everyone, we have certain celebrity and reach that we bring to the table. Team owners obviously have enormous resources and their own network of associations. Working together, we can accomplish even more. There was no other player in the room who could have done that, says Armand Hill, a veteran NBA assistant coach who helped spark voter registration efforts among the players, one marker of rising political awareness. More than 95% of players wound up registering for the 2020 election, while just 22% voted in 2016, according to the NBA Union. I just wanted to reassure that they were giving us their word, says James, and I was going to give them our word that we would continue to play on with the season as long as we had action going on off the floor at the same time. Owners pledged to work with local election officials to convert arenas into polling places, establish a social justice coalition with players and coaches, and provide some playoff advertising space to promote civic engagement. After Obama appeared as a virtual fan during the broadcast of Game 1 of the NBA Finals on September 30th and thanked a group of first-time poll workers, more than a vote's registrations more than doubled, from 12,439 to 26,398 over the next 5 days. Nadia Lee, a recent law school grad living in the Atlanta area, signed on after a tweet from James. She also recruited about 10 friends to staff precincts. From 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on November 3rd, she helped people fill out provisional ballots at a school in Georgia's DeKalb County. I did not know how I could be a poll worker, says Lee, until LeBron told me. In the black community, we always hear the notion of we want to see change, says James, but we rarely actually go out and try to help and call for action, actually do it. So I can say that my black people and my black communities, they actually went out and said not only did they want change, they actually went out and did it. Christopher Towler, founder of the Black Voter Project, believes that James' work predominantly affected black voters and had a real effect on turnout. He influenced the outcome of the election, says Towler, an assistant professor of political science at California State University, Sacramento. The jury is still out on if he tipped it. James' work with More Than a Vote marks another milestone in his personal evolution. You want to keep athletics and politics separate, James said back in June 2008. He did support Obama that year, but it was in 2012 when James posted a picture of himself and his Miami Heat teammates in hooded sweatshirts in honor of Trayvon Martin that he began to more publicly fuse the two. In 2014, James wore an I Can't Breathe warm-up shirt before a game in Brooklyn after a New York City grand jury declined to indict an officer who had applied a chokehold to Eric Garner, who had uttered those 3 words before his death. Still, as recently as July 2017, an article in the Journal of Sports and Social Issues titled Athletes and/or Activists, LeBron James and Black Lives Matter argued that James wears the activist label cautiously. That's no longer the case. Early in his NBA career, he started giving back in his hometown of Akron, Ohio, with an annual charity bike ride. Now, a collage of students and community members from his I Promise school, which opened in the city in 2018 and offers free busing, meals, uniforms, bikes, and other resources outside the classroom, like mental health support, flanks James on a Wheaties box. In July, James Foundation opened the I Promise Village, a transitional housing complex for school families in need. Like Latasha Clark's. A home health aide, Clark fell behind on bills after losing work hours because of the pandemic, and she and her 2 children were evicted from their house. They moved into the I Promise Village in August, as Clark's daughter started 3rd grade at the school. He has opened up doors that I never thought would have been open for me, says Clark, fighting tears. I'm just a regular single black mother trying to make her way. Just being here, I've met a lot of different people that have supported me more than anyone I have ever known in my life. The next step for I Promise is an initiative centered on job training and financial literacy. This work changes lives. It also builds trust. There is an attachment through racial identity for African Americans, especially when they see even the most privileged famous athletes still understand and relate to the black community like anyone else would, says the Black Voter Project's Towler. LeBron James can fill a tremendous gap in future mobilization efforts and really empower black people in ways politicians since Obama haven't been able to do. As he embarks on his 18th NBA season this winter following the shortest offseason in North American major pro team sports history, the 2020-21 schedule tips off on December 22nd. The Lakers clinched the 2020 championship on October 11th. James insists his work is just starting. We feel really good right now, he says, but you don't want to feel great because it's never done. More Than a Vote is now reminding ex-felons of their voting rights in Georgia and mobilizing young first-time voters for the state's January 5th runoff election, which could determine control of the U.S. Senate. It would never, ever go back to us just playing our respective sports, says James. It will never be that way for as long as I'm around. And hopefully I've inspired enough athletes that even when I'm gone, that legacy will carry on. And now we go to Entertainer of the Year, BTS. In a year when live music went quiet, they became the biggest band in the world, by Riza Bruner. It's late October, and Suga is sitting on a couch strumming a guitar. His feet are bare, his long hair falling over his eyes. He noodles around, testing out chords and muttering softly to himself, silver hoop earrings glinting in the light. I just started learning a few months ago, he says. It's an intimate moment, the kind you'd spend with a new crush in a college dorm room while they confess rock star ambitions. But Suga is 1/7 of the Korean pop band BTS, which means I'm just one of millions of fans watching, savoring the moment. BTS isn't just the biggest K-pop act on the charts. They've become the biggest band in the world, full stop. Between releasing multiple albums, breaking every type of record, and appearing to these extemporaneous live streams in 2020, BTS ascended to the zenith of pop stardom. And they did it in a year defined by setbacks, one in which the world hit pause and everyone struggled to maintain their connections. Other celebrities tried to leverage this year's challenges. Most failed. Remember that star-studded Imagine video? But BTS's bonds to their international fan base, called ARMY, deepened amid the pandemic, a global racial reckoning, and worldwide shutdowns. There are times when I'm still taken aback by all the unimaginable things that are happening, Suga tells Time later, but I ask myself, who's going to do this if not us? Today, K-pop is a multi-billion-dollar business, but for decades the gatekeepers of the music world, the Western radio moguls, media outlets, and number crunchers, treated it as a novelty. BTS hits the expected high notes of traditional K-pop, sharp outfits, crisp choreography, and dazzling videos, but they've matched that superstar shine with a surprising level of honesty about the hard work that goes into it. BTS meets the demands of Top 40's authenticity era without sacrificing any of the gloss that made K-pop a cultural force. It doesn't hurt that their songs are irresistible, polished confections that are dense with hooks and sit comfortably on any mainstream playlist. BTS is not the first Korean act to establish a secure foothold in the West, yet their outsized success today is indicative of a sea change in the inner workings of fandom and how music is consumed. From propelling their label to a $7.5 billion IPO valuation to inspiring fans to match their $1 million donation to Black Lives Matter, BTS is a case study in music industry dominance through human connection. Once Suga masters the guitar, there won't be much left for them to conquer. In an alternate universe where COVID-19 didn't exist, BTS's 2020 would likely have looked much like the years that came before. The group got its start in 2010 after K-pop mastermind and big hit entertainment founder Bang Si-hyuk recruited RM, 26, from Seoul's underground rap scene. He was soon joined by Jin, 28, Suga, 27, J-Hope, 26, Jimin, 25, V, 24, and Jungkook, 23, selected for their dancing, rapping, and singing talents. But unlike their peers, BTS had an anti-establishment streak, both in their activism and in the way they contributed to their songwriting and production, which was then rare in K-pop, although that started to change. In BTS's debut 2013 single, No More Dream, they critiqued Korean social pressures, like the high expectations placed on school kids. They have been open about their own challenges with mental health and spoken publicly about their support for the LGBTQ+ rights. Same-sex marriage is still not legally recognized in South Korea. And they've modeled a form of gentler, more neutral masculinity, whether dyeing their hair pastel shades or draping their arms lovingly over one another. All this has made them unique, not just in K-pop, but also in the global pop marketplace. In March, BTS was prepping for a global tour. Instead, they stayed in Seoul to wait out the pandemic. For the group, life didn't feel too different. We always spend 30 days a month together, 10 hours a day, Jin says. But with their plans upended, they had to pivot. In August, BTS dropped an English-language single, Dynamite, that topped the charts in the U.S., a first for an all-Korean act. With their latest album this year, B, they've become the first band in history to debut a song and album at number 1 on Billboard's charts in the same week. We never expected that we would release another album, says RM. Life is a trade-off. Their triumphs this year weren't just about the music. In October, they put on perhaps the biggest virtual ticketed show of all time, selling nearly 1 million tickets to the 2-night event. Their management company went public in Korea, turning Bang into a billionaire and each of the members into millionaires, a rarity in an industry where the spoils often go to the distributors, not the creators. And they were finally rewarded with a Grammy nomination. On YouTube, where their big hit labels is one of the top 10 most subscribed music accounts, with over 13 billion views by this year, their only real competition is themselves, says YouTube's music trends manager Kevin Meenan. The Dynamite video racked up 101 million views in under 24 hours, a first for the platform. They've beaten all their own records, he says. Not that the glory comes without drawbacks, namely lack of free time. It's nearing midnight in Seoul in late November, and BTS, San Suga, who's recovering from shoulder surgery, are fitting in another interview, this time just with me. V, Jimin, and J-Hope spontaneously burst into song as they discuss Jin's upcoming birthday. Love, 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 they harmonize, making good use of the Beatles' chorus, turning to their bandmate and crossing their fingers in the Korean version of the heart symbol. Comparisons to that epoch-defining group are inevitable. What's different is that we're 7 and we also dance, says V. It's kind of like a cliche when big boy bands are coming up. Oh, there's another Beatles, says RM. I've interviewed BTS 5 times, and in every interaction they are polite to a fault. But by now they must be weary of revisiting these comparisons, just as they must be tired of explaining their success. RM says it's a mix of luck, timing, and mood. I'm not 100% sure, he says. They've matured into smart celebrities, focused and cautious. They're both more ready for the questions and more hesitant to make big statements. When you ask BTS about their landmark year, for once they're not exactly chipper. J-Hope Riley calls it a roller coaster. Stuff happens, says RM. It was a year that we struggled a lot, says Jimin. Usually a showman, on this point he seems more introspective than usual. We might look like we're doing well on the outside with the numbers, but we do go through a hard time ourselves, he says. For a group whose purpose is truly defined by their fans, the lack of human interaction has been stifling. Still, they've made it a point to represent optimism. I always wanted to become an artist that can provide comfort, relief, and positive energy to people, says J-Hope. That intent harmonized with the sincerity of our group and led us to where we are today. In an era marked by so much anguish and cynicism, BTS has stayed true to their message of kindness, connection, and self-acceptance. That's the foundation of their relationship with their fans. South Korean philosopher and author Dr. Ji-young Lee describes the passion of BTS fandom as a phenomenon called horizontality, a mutual exchange between artists and their fans. As opposed to top-down instruction from an icon to their followers, BTS has built a true community. Us and our fans are a great influence on each other, says J-Hope. We learn through the process of making music and receiving feedback. The BTS fandom isn't just about ensuring the band's primacy. It's also about extending the band's message of positivity into the world. BTS and ARMY are a symbol of change in zeitgeist, not just of generational change, says Lee. And in June, BTS became a symbol of youth activism worldwide after they donated $1 million to the Black Lives Matter movement amid major protests in the U.S. They have a long track record of supporting initiatives like UNICEF and school programs. BTS says now it was simply in support of human rights. That was not politics. It was related to racism, Jin says. We believe everyone deserves to be respected. That's why we made that decision. That proved meaningfully for fans like Yasin Adam, 20, an ARMY from Georgia who runs popular BTS social media accounts sharing news and updates, and who is black. It will bring more awareness to this issue people like me face in this country, he says. I see myself in them, or at least a version of myself. In May and June, a broad coalition of K-pop fans made headlines for interfering with a police app and buying out tickets for a Trump campaign rally, depleting the in-person attendance. Later that summer, Army's grassroots fundraising effort matched BTS's $1 million donation to Black Lives Matter within 24 hours. For 20-year-old Nicole Santero, who is Asian American, their success in the U.S. is also a triumph of representation. I never really saw people like myself on such a mainstream stage, Santero says. She's writing her doctoral dissertation on the culture of BTS fandom, and she runs a popular Twitter account that analyzes and shares BTS data. Anytime I'm awake, I'm doing something related to BTS, she says. This is a deeper kind of love. Devotion like that is a point of pride for BTS, particularly in a year when so much has felt uncertain. We're not sure if we've actually earned respect, RM says, but one thing for sure is that people feel like, okay, this is not just some kind of a syndrome, a phenomenon. He searches for the right words. These little boys from Korea are doing this. Now here's an article by Suyin Haynes. Green Shoots. 2019 Person of the Year, Greta Thunberg plants seeds for a post-pandemic world. Like millions of students around the world, Greta Thunberg is still getting used to attending school virtually. But on a Sunday morning in late November, the 17-year-old Swedish climate activist, the youngest individual person of the year ever, says she's enjoying having some routines back. That's what I missed most during the last year, says Thunberg. It was a busy one. She sailed across the Atlantic to speak at the UN in New York City, turned the spotlight on indigenous activists at the UN Climate Summit in Madrid, and met world leaders in the World Economic Forum in Davos. Since her first school strike for the climate outside the Swedish parliament in August 2018, millions more around the world have joined Thunberg's movement, demanding urgent transformative change to save the planet from environmental catastrophe. And as the world has adapted to life during a global pandemic, so have the young activists fighting for the future of our planet. All movements have had to step back during this pandemic, says Thunberg, whose plans for 2020 to travel to Asia via the Trans-Siberian Railway were upended. You have to take a few steps back for the greater good. The introduction of lockdown and social distancing into everyday life has ruled out the possibility of major in-person protests. But Thunberg says she and her fellow activists were already adept at working remotely, as many of them avoid flying because of air travel's high carbon emissions. This year, they've held mass video calls and events, including virtual Global Climate Summit, launched online campaigns to increase voter turnout and political participation during the U.S. elections, and filed landmark climate litigation that could order European governments to step up emissions reductions. And in a year when movements for racial justice have gained worldwide support, the climate movement is having a long overdue reflection on the intersections of racial and climate justice. The pandemic, Thunberg says, is first and foremost a tragedy, yet she says that the international response has shown how governments could act on the climate emergency. It is possible to treat a crisis like a crisis. It is possible to put people's health above economic interests, and it is possible to listen to the science, she argues, adding that the pandemic has increased the value of science in many societies, as governments depend on scientific expertise to make policy decisions. As governments speak of green recovery plans for a post-pandemic world, Thunberg has kept up pressure on decision-makers. She and other activists wrote an open letter to EU leaders and heads of state in July, calling for actions including fossil fuel divestment and binding annual carbon budgets. After the letter, they met in person with German Chancellor Angela Merkel and virtually with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte. Thunberg was unimpressed. It's the same as always, they say. We're not doing enough, but at least it's better than nothing, Thunberg says. The time for that is over. We now need to do the impossible. And while she sees the election of Joe Biden as a symbolic departure from the other one, as she refers to outgoing President Donald Trump, she warns against complacency. We can't go back to sleep and think things are solved now. Thunberg will turn 18 in January and seems more confident and assertive than the child who unexpectedly started a movement more than 2 years ago. Like most of us, she's unsure of her plans for next year. I'm just going to take things as they come, she says, and try to take it one day at a time. Yet, on the threshold of adulthood, she remains firmly convinced of her mission. Of course, I'm going to continue to do everything I can to push in the right direction, no matter what the circumstances are. Now we have Biden in his own words. Time spoke with Biden in Wilmington, Delaware on December 7th. This excerpt has been edited for clarity and space. On restoring America's middle class. If my plan is able to be implemented, my whole economic plan, I think it's going to go down as one of the most progressive administrations in American history. We've lost the idea that when ordinary people do well, everybody does better. It's important that we focus on the things that provide opportunity. On pardoning Donald Trump. My Justice Department will make decisions based on facts. They're the people's lawyers. They're not my lawyers. I'm never going to pick up the phone and say, pardon so-and-so, or go out and prosecute so-and-so. But I lived through Gerald Ford's pardoning of Richard Nixon. I think that the law and the circumstances should take its effect. I'm not suggesting Trump be prosecuted or not, but I would not be engaged in that prematurely. How the pandemic has changed him and us. What's been reinforced is my absolute commitment that everyone is entitled to health care. It's not about whether or not it's a privilege. It's a right. We're the only country in the world that has come out of every crisis stronger than we went into the crisis. I predict we will come out of this crisis stronger than when we went in. Fighting vaccine hesitancy. The words of a president matter. Whether they're good presidents or bad, they matter. I joined the 3 presidents who said they would be publicly vaccinated because I think people will realize we have to reinstate confidence that science is real. If someone with the reputation of Anthony Fauci and the leading scientists of the country said this vaccine works, they should take it. Choosing Kamala Harris. She is straight as an arrow. She is really, really bright. She is tough, but yet she has a heart that understands what it's like to be on the other side of prejudice. She also was an immigrant's daughter who was raised in a strange way like I was. We were taught that we could be anything. Don't give up, just move, keep pushing. And I just found her to be someone who, if in fact something happened to me, I knew that they could take over. That's Kamala. On uniting a divided nation. I got widely criticized when I first announced my candidacy for saying that we had to not greet Trump with a clenched fist, but with more of an open hand, that we weren't going to respond to hate with hate. And when George Floyd was killed, I was cautioned by some really smart people. Don't go out and talk about racial inequity. Don't mention it because you're going to lose the suburbs. My argument all along is that the American people aren't there. The American people are not mean-spirited. They do want to see justice. They want to be united. They want to bring the country together. This is a matter of letting the air out of the balloon a little bit. I think you're going to see a lot more cooperation than anybody thinks. What he'd like people to say of him in 4 years: that America was better off, and average Americans are better off the day we left than the day we arrived. That's my objective. Now here's Kamala Harris in her own words. Time spoke with Harris in Wilmington, Delaware on December 7th. This excerpt has been edited for clarity and space. What she wants to do first. There's a lot, to be honest. We're talking about a public health crisis that has killed hundreds of thousands of people, has infected tens of millions. We are in the midst of an economic crisis that's being compared to the Great Depression, a long overdue reckoning on racial injustice, and a climate crisis. We have to be able to multitask, just like any parent or human being does. About Joe Biden. I can tell you many things about him with admiration and respect, including that Joe asked me to be his running mate because he understands that we have different life experiences. But he also knows, and I know, and it's a point of pride for me, that we have an incredible amount of shared experiences and values. We were both raised in strong, hard-working families. We're grounded in faith. We both have spent our entire careers in public service. I think that's what makes ours a very full and very robust partnership. Getting the call. My team got a call that the former vice president would like to speak to you. The anxiety, the tension was high. What was the call? What was this call going to be? Instead of going on as some might with their involvement with themselves, immediately Joe said, "So you want to do this?" He just got right to the point. That's who Joe is. There's no pomp and circumstance with him. He's a straight shooter. Why Biden and Harris won? The country wanted a leader who pledged their ability to heal and to build a broad coalition. The American people said, let's move forward. Let's understand that regardless of where you live, your race, your ethnicity, the language of your grandmother, let's move forward, knowing that the vast majority of us have more in common than what separates us. It's about basic stuff. Can I get a job? Are my kids going to have the opportunity for an education that allows them to reach their God-given capacity? I think that's what people want as we move forward, and I think that's what the American people got. Restoring the soul of the nation. Our souls will be well when people know that they can feed their children, when they know that they can have a job that allows them to not only pay the bills by the end of the month, but to have a sense of dignity in terms of knowing they're providing for their families and creating a pathway for their future possibilities. The soul of the nation is well when people don't have to worry about whether they can afford their medical bills or whether they'll go bankrupt because they have a family member that's sick. It's these basic things that should be considered human rights, frankly, civil rights. On being first. It is one of my responsibilities. My mother had many sayings. She would say, Kamala, you may be the first to do many things. Make sure you're not the last. Which is why, in my victory speech, I said, I will be the first, but I will not be the last. And that's about legacy. That's about creating a pathway. That's about leaving the door more open than it was when you walked in. Now here's an article by Anna DeVere Smith, What She Brings. Kamala Harris is a first, but she stands on a solid foundation. On August 11th, many of us were waiting with considerable suspense to find out whom Joe Biden would pick to be his running mate. A video that shows him calling Kamala Harris goes like this. Biden, all right. We see him taking off his mask. Then we hear Harris' voice on the line. Harris, hi, sorry to keep you. Biden, no, that's all right. You ready to go to work? There is silence, about 3 seconds of absolute silence. Harris, oh my God, I'm so ready to go to work. Biden, first of all, is the answer yes? Harris. The answer is absolutely yes, Joe, and I am ready to work. When Kamala Harris becomes the Vice President of the United States in January, she will be, as has been frequently noted, a first. The first woman, the first black person, and the first Indian American person to hold this office. But while it is worth celebrating that the top leadership of the U.S. will better mirror its people, it is important to remember that simply naming these identities does not tell us all we need to know. It's within the particulars of her lived experience as a black and Indian American woman that we can truly understand who she is today and what she brings with her to the White House. Harris writes in her memoir, The Truths We Hold, that her mother, who grew up in the Indian state of Tamil Nadu, understood very well that she was raising two black daughters. Harris' now well-worn narrative includes little about her father, who moved to the U.S. from Jamaica and acquired a Ph.D. in economics from the University of California, Berkeley. Shyamala Gopalan and Donald Harris fell in love as civil rights activists and divorced when the future VP was 7. Gopalan got custody of Harris and her sister Maya. Harris mentioned spending summers with her father in Palo Alto, California, where he became a tenured professor of economics at Stanford in the 1970s, no small feat for a black man. The farm, the Harvard of the West, still had only a handful of black faculty when I became tenured there in the 90s. I cannot imagine what it would have been like to be black and on the tenure track in the 70s. But it is her mother, a noted cancer researcher, who is frequently evoked in Harris' influence and inspiration. When she came here from India at the age of 19, she maybe didn't quite imagine this moment, Harris said in her victory speech on November 7th, but she believed so deeply in an America where a moment like this is possible. And that she came at all is thanks largely to Harris' grandfather, P.V. Gopalan, a civil servant in India. The history of South Asian activist struggle for independence is rich, and the movement's solidarity with the fight for civil rights in the U.S. runs deep. Harris has talked of walking the beaches of Besant Nagar with her grandfather, her pen pal in those aerogram pre-mail days, and being inspired as a girl by the passion he had for democracy. Still, it's worth noting that although Harris is for the people, she is not of the people. When we speak of her as the first Indian American Vice President and Vice President of the United States, we should also acknowledge that she comes into this position with at least some level of privilege. Her family is Brahmin, the most elite caste in India. Harris is a highly educated and accomplished woman, but she is hardly the only one in her family. In an interview with an Indian newscaster after the election, Dr. Sarala Gopalan, Harris' aunt, or Chiti, explained that sending Shyamala to the U.S. was not something you would expect from a South Indian in 1958, but their father believed that women should be educated. When she became a senator, I went and told her, Kamala, you are a diamond in the family, said Sarala Gopalan, a gynecologist. And she just said to me, Chiti, I am not a diamond. I am a diamond amongst diamonds in the family. Well, that's all the time we have for today. This has been Timothy James with Time Magazine. I hope you've enjoyed today's reading from the audio reading service at the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana.